Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Well, over the last week, I've tried to take a bit more of a tack of educating rather than reacting to things that we see in the news, things that we see in the world. Because in my mind, there is a solution to all of our problems. And sometimes that can actually be found in the past. And when I say things or when I inform you of things, it's based on fact that an authority has told me, or based on the fact of something that I have read, a published paper, for example, or a famous figure. And what I wanted to do with this particular video is introduce you to one of these figures who I've started to read and gather a lot of information about. And that figure is A.V. Dicey. Now, to tell you a little bit about him, I thought it best, just for ease, if we pull up the Wikipedia page, which details everything about him, really. So let's have a look at this. A.V. Dicey, or Albert Venn Dicey, you can see from that picture there, it's quite old. He was born in 1835 and died in 1922. He was a British Whig jurist and, most importantly of all, a constitutional theorist. He's most widely known as the author of Introduction to the Study of the Law of the Constitution. The principles it expounds are considered part of the uncodified Constitution. Well, this is where Wikipedia kind of differs from reality, because we have a constitution and it is codified. It's just that people in the mainstream and the British state as a whole, and articles like this, try and tell you that it isn't. He became Venerian Professor of English Law at Oxford, one of the first professors of law at the LSE Law School, and a leading constitutional scholar of his day. Dicey popularised the phrase rule of law, although it goes back as far as the 17th century. And this is a little bit about his beginnings. Dicey was born on the 4th of February, 1835. His father was Thomas Edward Dicey, a senior wrangler in 1811 and proprietor of the Northampton Mercury and chairman of the Midland Railway. His mother was Annie Marie Stephen, daughter of James Stephen, Master in Chancery. Per his own words, Dicey owed everything to the wisdom and firmness of his mother. Mothers can be wise. His elder brother was Edward James Stephen Dicey. He was also a cousin of Leslie Stephen and Sir James Fitzjames Stephen. Dicey was educated at King's College School in London and Balliol College, Oxford, graduating with firsts in classical moderations in 1856 and in Literae Humaniores in 1858. In 1860, he won a fellowship at Trinity College, Oxford, which he forfeited upon his marriage in 1872. He was called to the bar by the Inner Temple in 1863, subscribed to the Jamaica Committee around 1865, and was appointed to the Venerian Chair of English Law at Oxford in 1882, a post he held until 1909. In his first major work, the seminal Introduction to the Study of the Law of the Constitution, he outlined the principles of parliamentary sovereignty, for which he is most known. He argued that the British Parliament was an absolutely sovereign legislature with the right to make or unmake any law. In the book, he defined the term constitutional law as including all rules which directly or indirectly affect the distribution or the exercise of the sovereign power in the state. He understood that the freedom British subjects enjoyed, which we're having trouble with recently, aren't we, was dependent on the sovereignty of Parliament, the impartiality of the courts, free from governmental interference, and the supremacy of the common law. In 1890, he was appointed Queen's Counsel. He later left Oxford and went on to become one of the first professors of law at the new London School of Economics. There he published in 1896 his Conflicts of Law, Upon his death in 7th of April 1922, Harold Laski memorialised him as the most considerable figure in English jurisprudence since Maitland. Now, the important thing here is some of his political views. Dicey was receptive to Jeremy Bentham's brand of individualist liberalism and welcomed the extension of the franchise in 1867. He was affiliated with a group known as the University Liberals. The University Liberals, who composed the Essays on Reform and was not ashamed to be labelled a radical. Dicey held that personal liberty is the basis of national welfare. He treated parliamentary sovereignty as a central premise of the Constitution. A member of the Liberal Unionist Party, Dicey was a strong opponent of the Irish Home Rule movement, writing and speaking against it extensively from 1886 until shortly before his death, advocating that no concessions be made to Irish nationalism in relation to the government of any part of Ireland as an integral part of the UK. In March 1914, Dicey stated that if a Home Rule Bill was passed, it would be a political crime lacking all moral and constitutional authority. The voice of the present House of Commons was not the voice of the nation. That's the problem we've got now. He was thus bitterly disillusioned by the Anglo-Irish Treaty Agreement in 1921 that Southern Ireland should become a self-governing dominion, the Irish Free State, separate from the United Kingdom. Dicey was also vehemently opposed to women's suffrage proportional representation, while acknowledging that existing first-past-the-post system was not perfect, and to the notion that citizens have the right to ignore unjust laws. Dicey viewed that the necessity of establishing a stable legal system as more important than the potential injustice that would occur from following unjust laws. In spite of this, he did concede that there were circumstances in which it would be appropriate to resort to an armed rebellion, but stated that such occasions are extremely rare. And you can see under here a very big list of all of his works and everything that he was involved in, written, talked about. There's so much information online about the guy, there really is. Now, what I want to turn to is some comments about the Union, which were made even all the way back at the time of its inception. And this comes from this book here, Thoughts on the Union Between England and Scotland by Albert V. Dicey and Robert S. Wright, Macmillan & Co. Limited, St Martin Street, London, 1920. So this book's nearly 100 years old. Can you believe it? Let's have a look at the first page. It's got some information which is quite important, or it really does make you think. So, first period, the acceptance of constitutional unity, 1707 to 1760. In considering this subject, it will be well to consider first the resistance to the Act of Union, and secondly, the final acceptance of political or constitutional unity. So resistance to the Act of Union, 1707 to 1745. The resistance to the Act of Union is shown by four occurrences. Now, the first, there was an attempted repeal by the Act of Union in 1713. A modern reader is astounded to learn that in less than 7 years after the passing of the Act of Union, there was introduced into the House of Lords a bill for repealing the Act. So far as the number of seats went, the proposal was all but carried, that it was supported by the leading Whigs and by many of the men, among others, the Duke of Argyll, who had been in 1707 the most zealous of Unionists. And lastly, that bill was opposed. So you can see there, a mere less than a decade after the Act of Union came to being, they wanted to shelve it. They wanted to get rid of it. Interesting, isn't it? And thrown out as inexpedient and unconstitutional by the Tories, this appears to afford undoubted proof that the maintenance of the Union had become odious to its best and truest friends. Yet, as elsewhere, a student of the Constitution must be on his guard against mistaking fictions for facts and shame for realities. The following words by an author whose judgment may be trusted well describe the comic dreariness or the solemn farce which made a result of parliamentary manoeuvre. The Union had thus apparently been saved by its enemies and all but upset, or at least unsettled, by its friends, and this would doubtless be a very remarkable occurrence were it not evident that the whole affair was little better than a solemn farce. It was not conviction, but a regard for their respective interests, which had induced the two parties on this occasion to change sides. As the Union was extremely unpopular in Scotland, and as a general election was to take place within a few weeks, the Scottish Whigs, irritated as they were by the Malts Bill, did not venture to oppose the motion for repeal when it was urged upon them by Lockhart. Their English friends professed their readiness to dissolve the Union, provided that other means, equally efficacious, could be devised for securing the Protestant succession. But their chief object was to embarrass the ministry, which was bound to resist the motion, however welcome to the Tories. There's another part to that here. At a time when its attention was engrossed by the declining health of the king, Lockhart remarks that some of the Scottish Whigs thought they affected to approve of it were evidently thunderstruck at its proposal, and the Earl of Findlater quite exposed the character of the task imposed upon him by the Lords. He showed uneasiness and made so many apologies for what he has to do. It was very comical, wrote his English politician to Swift, to see the Tories, who voted with Lord Treasurer against the dissolution of the Union, under all the perplexities in the world, lest they should be victorious, and the Scotch who voted for a bill of dissolution under agonies lest they themselves should carry the point. The more or less unreal attempt to repeal the Act of Union in 1713 does, however, show that the Act then had lost much of its popularity, as it may have possessed in 1707. The rebellion of 1715, with the history of the rebellion, we're not here concerned. One may confidently, however, assume that as a body, the Jacobites or Tories who took up arms against George I were opposed to an Act of Union on which His Majesty's title to the crown of Great Britain depended, and the success of the rebellion was nearly as probable as its failure. So you can see, even back then, after the Union was proposed, there were attempts to get rid of it because it proved unpopular. And if you think as well, the only reason that it was really needed or it was saved, that Union, was because of the empire that was in place at the time. You imagine how spread out, how far afield our territories actually were. So the argument is there. Is that Union for that purpose redundant? And when I say Union, I mean unitary state, the United Kingdom that we have at the moment, rather than a constitutional common law union, which is what it should be. It's very interesting reading when you go back and look at history and the forefathers, the constitutionalists that created and interpreted the law that we all go by, and you know, some of the feelings that there were at the time, and then you look back at the times we're living in now, and it certainly makes me think, is there something in this? Let me know what you think in the comments. Again, a little bit different, a little bit educational, interesting. At least I found it interesting. Hit the like button, subscribe to the channel. As always, I look forward to talking to you soon. Toodaloo.